Hello, everyone. My name is Claire Morton, and I am the Community Assistance Manager here at MHP. Welcome to our first timers and welcome back to our repeat guests as we start the 7th portion of the MHP web series, More Than Compliance, Multifamily Districts That Work in Your Community. Graciously sponsored by the Bar Foundation, this series is an important part of MHP's Technical Assistance Program for MBTA communities. In previous sessions, we learned about the benefits complete streets and neighborhoods bring to communities, water and wastewater basics, encouraging family-friendly housing in MBTA communities, and provided guidance on action plans and technical assistance available to MBTA communities. Today, we'll focus on citing your district for adjacent communities. Today's speakers are Grant King, Robert Cabral, Taylor Perez, and Amber Davis of the Southeastern Regional Planning and Economic Development District, SERPED for short. Grant is a comprehensive planning manager at SERPED, where he focuses on master plans, economic development, housing production, beautiful and easy to use civic engagement, and common sense project implementation. Grant co-founded a part-time GIS and design firm, GIS Boston. Grant also serves on the board of directors of Old Colony Habitat for Humanity. Robert is the principal comprehensive planner and project manager at SERPED, where he provides technical assistance for zoning, master plans, housing production, and transit-oriented development. He particularly enjoys distilling these concepts into clear and impactful graphic analyses. Taylor is the Senior Comprehensive Planner and Community Engagement Specialist at SERPED. Her primary focus since joining SERPED has been providing technical assistance to municipalities and organizations in the form of thoughtfully and creatively designed analyses. She also assists in project branding and visual design. Last but absolutely not least, Amber is the Senior Comprehensive Planner at SERPED. Her diverse background includes urban planning, environmental policy, public health, and climate change and adaptation, which fueled her passion for reinventing how human-centered urban planning can improve day-to-day life in communities affected by cumulative impacts. Without further ado, I will turn it over to the SERPED team.
Thank you very much, Claire. Taylor is going to share her screen, and while she does, I wanted to thank MHP and the MHP team for allowing us to participate in the 3ATA process. We're really honored to be here. Also wanted to thank the Department of Housing and Community Development and the team up in Boston for the resources they're making available and the guidance they're providing as we try to navigate the 3A process. And then last but certainly not least, again, our municipal partners who have added their really valuable insights to this and helped us understand it better in ways that we sometimes miss at the regional and state level. So Claire mentioned that our prior trainings, MHP-sponsored trainings, have been very specific in focus, and this today is no different. We have a set of tools and techniques. Taylor, if you'd scroll down to kind of, yeah, thank you. Tools and techniques that we think you might find useful to help decide where to locate your multifamily housing districts. This is especially for situations where there are no requirements to meet, right? So that's the space we're stepping into today. We do want to pause and just very clearly state that this is not meant to replace existing planning or local knowledge, by no means. We're really looking to kind of explore various ways that you can identify and organize and visualize your priorities as you think about where to site these districts. And then we hope this tool will allow you to explore different scenarios that may have complementary or sometimes competing priorities as the ones you bring to the table. I think we'll kind of try to find those areas of overlap. And then just basically an example of some tools and good data-driven mapping that you can use to test your decision making. So let's briefly cover what we'll be talking about today. Actually, if you go really back up 1 second, Taylor, sorry, thank you, this outline. So we're all familiar with 3ATA, that's why we're here. So we'll very briefly discuss that. We'll introduce this idea of suitability scoring. We'll go through that in detail and then, or really briefly, and then in detail later in the presentation. Amber will walk us through a brief tour of data and software and those considerations. Then we'll dive kind of deep into what we're calling suitability groups, or data that we've grouped by theme that, again, can help organize and simplify and prioritize our thinking and our way of navigating 3A. Then we will look at a comparison of 3 scenarios in a sample, a real adjacent community, North Attleboro, Massachusetts. I know we have some representatives from there today. Taylor will do a very brief dive into some considerations about data and how we interpret and visualize it. Rob will walk us through a brief hand-drawn alternative to all this GIS stuff. And we really believe that can be just as valuable, lead to discoveries that you might not make behind the keyboard, and a really viable option for non-GIS users. And then we'll conclude with some thoughts on implementation. So, right, we're all familiar with 3A. We understand the requirements and the 3 main points of a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre, that the districts be located not more than a half mile from transit options if applicable, and that the districts not have age restrictions, that the outcomes be suitable for families with children. So if we return to that if applicable part, that's really, again, what we're looking at today. Some MBTA communities have a clear requirement for where you must locate your district and the portion of your overall capacity, community-wide capacity, that the district must accommodate. And those, if we won't click on the link there, but those are clearly spelled out in Section 8 of the 3A guidelines. Others do not, or they do not for a portion of their district. And this is where we're trying to focus today, where that decision-making process is a little more open-ended. So that's where suitability scoring comes in. And I want to just briefly touch on this so you kind of know where we're going, and then we'll hit all of these points in detail. So the first step is gathering good data, and Amber will walk us through this. These should be the main map features that you want to use to inform your decision. And you'll see we use a few dozen, but for you, it can be anything you really want to focus on your multifamily housing being near or being far away from. That's for the first step, organizing a good data set. The second step is really beginning to think about how you value those layers and map features, and they're really your values, right? This is an exercise in the goals and values you or your community bring to the table. And the simple way of doing so is just like placing weights on them, numerical weights, often 0 through 10, and they can represent, we can sort of translate all this into simple statements like, I really value access to open space or fresh foods or other amenities for my multifamily housing. Or it could be on the flip side, I really want to avoid impacts on natural resources or farmland, is the example we provide here. And then in its basic form, if you would click on this, this diagram, in its basic form, we simply add all of these features up where, I skipped a step. You have to kind of decide on what your unit of analysis is going to be. It could be parcels, it could be existing zoning districts or just a few of them that you already have in mind, or it could be kind of an equally divided up fishnet grid, which is what we chose to kind of keep things simple. Our grid is 10 acres. And you just kind of do the math. Where are there stacked up positive considerations? Where are there considerations that we might want to avoid, negative considerations? The final output comes out in a nice grid, a nice raster, and you can use it to test further scenarios. We'll explain all this again in a moment. That's suitability scoring kind of in a nutshell. And here's just a sneak preview of how it can all add up on a town-wide scale. This is North Attleboro, and where the darker shades of red and orange are more suitable from this perspective of multifamily housing development, and where the cooler colors are less suitable. But again, this is just a preview. We'll get into all this in detail. But before we do so, we thought we'd kind of lay a firm foundation and talk a little bit about the data sources we use here, software considerations, and a preview of our suitability groups. So for that, I pass the mic to Amber.
Thanks, Grant. So we all know here in Massachusetts, we have a wealth of outstanding data sources and data sets, right? So MassGIS provides the treasure trove of data at our fingertips. So we have the website below, and we all know suitability scoring is only as good as the data that we use. So to produce what we have featured here, we use ArcGIS, and we also use the extension Scenario 360 Community Biz. But we all know there's so many resources out there, software extensions that are available that can provide kind of the same or similar type of workspace that we use here and the results that's shown here as well. For more manual alternative, folks use their hands like me, you can use a map printout. So you just print out a map, and then you have some trace paper, and then you use colored pencils, which will show in detail in a few minutes or so. Now that could be just as effective, or not more so effective, in discovering different type of map elements that you might have missed or perhaps overlooked if you're just clicking the mouse and going through the software in itself. So we're using this data. So with the data that we use, we grouped similar map features into different sort of themes. So we'll also discuss the themes shortly. And so with the different type of themes that you have, it allows you to customize, everybody's big on customizing. So you can customize each of your suitability scoring. And then now you can experiment with different type of suitability groups. So in this exercise, we have 7. And you can discover or uncover a wide range of more kind of distinct scenarios. So for the 7 groups we have listed, that for this particular exercise, we have climate resilience, key infrastructure, priority areas, natural spaces, quality of life, water resources, and fostering equity. So now I'll turn it over to my colleague Taylor, and she will talk on adjacent communities.
Yeah, so I'm very excited to introduce our community that we're working with today. I know we've kind of already went over, but it's the town of North Attleboro. I saw Marie Klarner enter the waiting room, so we have a couple town staff who are here, and they're just a wonderful group of people to work with. I've been working with them personally for about 3 years now, so I'm just going to give a little background about the town. North Attleboro is located on the border of Rhode Island. It's about 15 miles north of Providence. It has a lovely downtown, plenty of open spaces, suburban neighborhoods, and several busy commercial corridors such as Route 1 and Route 1A. It's also home to the 10-Mile River and plenty of other important natural and agricultural resources. And given kind of all of these varying amenities, environmental considerations, and plenty of other factors, the decision makers there have a lot to grapple with when they're considering where to put their multifamily district. And I'm sure this is the case in many other MBTA communities across the Commonwealth. And so North Attleboro has a population of about 30,000, and it borders the city of Attleboro, which has 2 commuter rail stations, and the town of Mansfield, which has 1, thusly making it an adjacent community. And as an adjacent community under Section 3A, they have to create a zoning district that has capacity for 10% of its 2020 housing units. So that's 1,255 total units. And the district has to be a minimum of 50 acres in size. And so to kind of give a sense of scale, as Grant introduced earlier, we have a 10-acre fishnet that we've used as our unit of analysis. And so that's about 5 of these small cells right here. And again, for context, you can see Rhode Island here. This is Cumberland. We have Plainville to the north, Mansfield, Attleboro, and Norton as neighbors. And so I'm going to kick it back to Grant, and Grant's going to walk us through the suitability groups that kind of lay the foundation for this analysis that we did with North Attleboro.
Yeah, thank you guys. So this is really when we get into the nuts and bolts of how suitability scoring works. And we wanted to take a tour through the 7 groups of data that we have organized by theme that Amber previewed a moment ago, and then help you kind of understand those before we talk about how we weight them differently based on some scenarios. And those are the scenarios I was referring to before that might be on their face competing priorities. But I think when you see some of the outcomes, you might be surprised that there's some pretty clear areas of consensus. And we're hopeful that there might be in your community as well. So this first one is quality of life. And it really represents that statement in quotes there, where I really want future residents of multifamily housing produced by Section 3A in my community to have access to assets and amenities. And what does this mean? What is the data that made this heat map? Well, it's things like recreational open space, sidewalks, things we're calling important everyday places. So grocery stores, banks, places of worship, libraries, things that people like to be near and travel to. And you can see from this particular scoring that there's a core in the center of the community where there's best access to these amenities. And we think where quality of life, at least again through this perspective, where quality of life would be best for future residents of multifamily housing. Then we have natural spaces. So this would represent the kind of perspective where I really want to do my best to avoid impacts on farmland, habitats, and so forth, right? So we can pause here and acknowledge that many of these resources are protected under state statute, under permitting, but it still is a good way, or I think best practice really, to kind of map these, see where there are multiple assets, multiple resources in the same area, and see where in the darker shade here, any multifamily housing development would have a smaller impact on those resources, where if you, through good site planning, through low impact development and so forth, in the lighter shade of green, where if you developed with a light touch, you would have minimal impact. And then those areas where likely already protected in some way, but where we really do want to avoid any type of impact from this perspective. Very similar considerations for water resources. Again, much of this is already has some level of protection through state law or through permitting. But if you really want to focus on avoiding impacts to important water resources, then in the darkest area, you would have minimal impact for multifamily housing development. In the lighter blue, you would have sort of a lighter impact or a light touch, again, if you considered low impact development and other site planning features. And then we have those clear areas that we want to avoid. And this weighted raster, again, is made up of the component parts of surface water protection areas, aquifers, including zone 2s, and other water resources such as cold water fisheries. Very important consideration here, climate resilience. So if you're thinking about from the perspective of climate resilience, if you want your future multifamily housing to be climate resilient and to consider future hazards, we have some safer locations in the darkest shades where there's obviously always going to be some type of consideration with increased stormwater events and droughts and things of that nature. In the lighter shades, we have more. We have still considerations and a little bit more so, and these usually are associated with hydric soils or proximity to wetlands. And then we have those areas that we truly want to consider as undesirable, again, from this perspective of climate resilience. And those are typically aligned with flood zones. I would pause to note that there's a lot of other good data here that we could have chosen, not just in climate resilience, but really throughout the thematic mapping. We really wanted to choose data that is widely available through MassGIS so that anybody who wanted to conduct this analysis could do so very easily with that readily available data. So just a quick disclaimer that we know there are lots of really good features from sources such as the Nature Conservancy and things like that. but we stuck with the readily available Mass GIS data here. So one of our final perspectives, I believe, maybe we have 2 or 3 more. This is, if I really want, my main priority is to have multifamily housing that has access to that key infrastructure and those transportation options. So think water, sewer, bus routes and highway interchanges. Think town facilities, that key sort of civil infrastructure, town halls, police stations, schools, hospitals, where applicable. And again, we see in the darker shades that we have the best access kind of in the center of town, some access around it, and then least access to the at the edges of the community. I'd like to pause here and note that, you know, it's pretty clear that in communities that have water and sewer infrastructure, it's probably best to consider citing high intensity uses such as multifamily housing where there's connections. It's certainly not a deal breaker, right? And I would offer as an anecdote, I think you can probably think of developments around your neck of the woods that satisfy this anecdote too. But I live in a soon to be adjacent small town. I say soon to be because we're in Southeastern Massachusetts and our status will change when South Coast Rail comes online. And you know, we're at where suburbia and rural New England kind of meet. And I live not more than a half mile from a pretty low density, 2 units per acre, 60 unit 40B development, home ownership, single family homes. That development has its own package treatment plant. So I sort of offer that to say that at those densities in this market, if the revenue side of the equation would support package treatment plants, I imagine there would likely be market outcomes for other areas, particularly at these minimum densities of 15 units per acre or more. So many communities across the Commonwealth have already affirmatively mapped through a public process priority development areas and priority protection areas as sort of basic land use planning out there in their communities. And we think that's an important consideration, particularly based on the community-driven process that those boundaries were often drawn with. We also have, as existing priorities, maybe existing multifamily housing districts that you might, or mixed use districts, any zoning districts of interest that you in your local planning or your local knowledge already have in mind. This group score considers that. It says, I want my multifamily housing to consider priorities and existing zoning that's already on the books and already well known in my city or town. And then finally, this is really a key one kind of based on perspective, because this particular exercise looks at multifamily housing, obviously. But if we were considering the best site for a new industrial park, we would probably want to avoid and be very mindful about development that went to areas that are environmental justice block groups or have high social vulnerability. In this case, we believe that because the statute is designed to create high quality housing options with an affordability component, and further because this exercise really thinks about grouping that with where there are assets and where there's existing quality of life and key infrastructure sort of draws, we've thought, at least from this perspective, we think of this as most to consider and one of those positive weighting factors. So fostering equity, drawing more multifamily housing options, high quality amenities, affordability components to areas that might need them. Right, and now I think I pass it to Taylor to talk about our scenarios, and we're having a little bit of a glitch in the map, but here we go. Good.
There we go. So we ran 3 scenarios using these group scores. I'm going to walk through all 3 of them and talk about how they're, different, how they're similar, and again, how your values will affect your outcome. And so this first scenario, we've called it our best balance scenario. This is equal weighting on all of the group scores that we just outlined. And this is for the decision maker that's just doing their best, trying to balance their town's needs and find some areas that they could work with. So as you can see, all of our group scores here are scored at an equal 5 down the middle. And so in this darkest green, kind of teal blue, is the most suitable. And then we go to kind of suitable, and then we go to not as suitable. North Attleboro's downtown, which is about here, in Attleboro Falls, some densely populated neighborhoods are coming up as the most suitable, largely just because they have the best balance. They have, access to amenities, access to recreational open spaces, access to the downtown. They have sewer, transit, etc. So they're really flashing in this kind of equal weighting scenario. Then we have a scenario that is a minimize impacts one. So this is high weighting on natural spaces, water resources, and climate. So again, for someone who's more focused on important resources and protection, this is for the decision maker that's just trying to make common sense decisions about those resources and, again, work around those. And so here you kind of see those natural spaces group score, the water resources, and the key infrastructure and climate are our highest weighted ones. And we've kind of dropped these more social, softer group scores down to a 3. And so if I zoom in, you can kind of see downtown North Attleboro has gotten a little fuzzier. And then you can really kind of see these clear delineations of local important resources. So this is that surface water protection area that we discussed. Here is a cold water fishery. This is their national fish hatchery. And, you can clearly see like areas that are not intersecting those are becoming a little more suitable, and areas, but still in downtown, it's looking to be the best, but it's different. Our last scenario, emphasizing assets. This is essentially the inverse of what I just discussed, where we've done a high weighting on quality of life, key infrastructure, and fostering equity. And this kind of gets at that quality of life group score that we just discussed in general, where emphasizing local assets is important and really focusing again on quality of life for both existing and future residents. And so here we've essentially inverted all of our group scores. Our quality of life group score is at a 9, as well as our key infrastructure and our fostering equity group scores. And all of the other ones have been dropped down. And so things have really tightened up, I think, in this scenario. It's very clear to see that North Attleboro's downtown, although it's been suitable in all of the other scenarios, is very suitable here because of how much access it has. All of those key group scores and what goes into them are really present in these areas. And areas on the fringe of the town that don't have access to that are really coming up as less suitable. And so we've kind of already been doing this, but it's just worth addressing. Comparing the outcomes, we have our minimize impact scenario and our emphasize assets on this side. This is the values question, right? This is, again, like how your values show up in these outcomes and how what you choose to weigh higher or lower will affect where you think is the best place and the most suitable for your multifamily. So if I just kind of swipe, just so we can get a visual, right? You can see here, like we discussed, those important natural resources are really showing up here. Our downtown's a little fuzzier. And if I kind of slowly swipe this way, you can see how that changes. So here you see that tightening up of downtown because it has the most access, and really pay attention to over here as we kind of get there. You can really see all of that area become less suitable, again, because it doesn't have as much access, and we weighed that very heavily in this scenario. So just a little thought exercise and something to consider as you think about your values and how you want to weigh them. And just to comment on visualizing your data, obviously here we've chosen to visualize it in groups. We've classified our data using natural breaks, the Jenks classification in GIS. And we just did this because we think it's the easiest. It's very clearly, this is suitable, this is not. And if that's what you're looking for, that's definitely the way to go, but it's not the only way. So we wanted to show an unclassed symbolization where rather than putting all of this data into buckets, we've stretched the distribution along a gradient. And again, this will change what your eyes see in the conclusions that you draw. So if I start here, as we did, this is the emphasized assets scenario, and I slowly bring the swipe, you can really see all that nuance in the data that comes through that was otherwise lost with the classification. And so again, you're still seeing North Attleboro's downtown, Attleboro Falls flash as the most suitable, but you kind of can see that, some areas to the east and to the west of it are actually a little bit more suitable than they appeared when we classified it. So I just think this is an interesting point, always something to consider. If you want nuance like this, this might be the way to go. But if you want to very clearly be able to just identify this is suitable, this is not, classifying is probably going to be the way to go. And so we made all of our group scores and our scenarios available in an unclassified form, just again to kind of understand what it looks like when it's not put in buckets. I'll go through a few of them and give some examples. Here, our quality of life group score. You can really see the nuance here. Again, everything that's kind of been flashing in these previous scenarios is still showing up, but you get to kind of get an idea a little bit more of where things are more suitable that otherwise might be lost. Conversely, the natural spaces group score is one that probably does benefit from classifying because there's a lot of fuzziness right here. You can kind of see very clearly, again, North Attleboro's downtown is very suitable, but this area is kind of not suitable. We're not really sure what's going on here. Maybe it's suitable, maybe it's not. We've got some very high suitability and some very low. And so it benefits from classifying. So again, not only does it depend on your values and your preferences, but also the data that you're using. And so all of our group scores are here. You can feel free to scroll through these at your leisure if you're curious and kind of interested to see what it looks like when it's not classified. We just wanted to make it available for folks in case they were in fact interested. And so with that, I'm going to kick it over to Rob. He's going to present the GIS alternative, the trace exercise that is very cool. I'm really excited to kind of hear more about it.
Thank you, Taylor. So yeah, as Amber and Taylor and Grant and others have mentioned a little bit, we wanted to create an analog suitability exercise as a parallel to the GIS analysis that we just covered. This kind of method, as Amber mentioned, is ideal for those who don't have access to GIS, but might have paper maps in their office, or those who can print maps from an online portal. This process involves taking a physical map and transferring that information onto a piece of trace paper, which we can see in the picture here. These pieces of trace paper function the same as the data layers that we just outlined in the GIS portion of this presentation. Now, to keep things simple, we selected 5 layers from our digital exercise to serve as the basis for this analysis. These included quality of life considerations, environmental justice, water resources, climate resilience, and town infrastructure. Now, from these 5 maps, we produced 2 composite maps. The first map highlights areas one might want to avoid when developing multifamily housing. This serves a subtractive purpose for our final analysis. The second map highlights factors we associate with being complementary to multifamily housing, and this has an additive effect. The concept behind grouping each layer to an additive and subtractive map was just to create a digestible overlay method. You just subtract the value of one map from the other. And there's a range of methods to organize these data layers, but I've just always found that keeping it simple is better. Next, after condensing these 5 maps into 2, we further condensed them into one map to produce a final raster map, which calculates the areas with the highest scores for citing a multifamily district. For the sake, again, of legibility and clarity, we left off lower scoring areas from this map, but we did choose to highlight those areas that might prohibit development. For example, locations within a floodplain. Ultimately, we think this analysis tracked pretty well with the GIS version. And while GIS absolutely has more computational power and ability to iterate quickly, analog definitely has some advantages. And again, Amber touched on some of these too. The ability to understand more materially the inputs and outputs of the maps, which I agree is a big thing. It requires fewer financial and technological resources. And it can be really fun to do this collaboratively around a table, utilizing shared and local knowledge. Now I'm going to hand it back to Grant. He's going to talk about how to utilize some of this suitability analysis to make more fine-grained decisions about citing your multifamily district.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so all of this GIS and hand-drawn stuff at the community scale can seem a little bit abstract. I think Taylor used the phrase thought exercise, and that's really what this is. But we know that you as community planners and elected officials and just decision makers in general already probably have some really good ideas about where all this should happen in your community. So we wanted to kind of zoom in to that moment where, okay, good, I've got a heat map. It's guiding me to locations in my community. What now? Can I test my own ideas? Can I see if they correspond with the analysis, or can I make new discoveries? That's really this last phase where we're thinking about changing the zoning, right? So this first site is Handy and Harmon. It's just, if you'd zoom out just a moment, Taylor, we're just southeast of the main beautiful downtown of North Attleboro. We're sort of in an underutilized former industrial site. We're along what I think you could argue is a commercial corridor that's kind of seen its heyday. We have some existing multifamily housing in the area, and as well as some lower density single family housing. Why is this scored so well? Well, it's minimizing those impacts on those habitat areas we saw, but it also has all of those access to key infrastructure, to the quality of life amenities downtown, to sidewalks, access, bus access. And it really could, if you were just to kind of zoom in here and think, okay, I've got 10 acre squares. If I zoned 5 of these at 25 UPA, then I would I know there's a lot of considerations, and DHCD has to review all of these zones, but I would more or less have met my statutory requirement. I would be in compliance for my 1,250 units in North Attleboro. This is another spot that lit up in really all of the scenarios, but in this best balance, I think it's the brightest. It's in a near an industrial park that is still much of which is still very, very active, particularly in the northern part. Yeah, thank you, Taylor. This is a good example of, you do have to kind of dive in and truth check all this stuff on the ground, right? So the furthest right square here is part of the interchange with Route 95, Interstate 95. So that's obviously not going to be developed. And I would argue that a good portion of the one to its left is probably not going to be developed either. So you can, had we chosen a different unit of analysis, not just this fishnet grid, but parcels or zoning districts, we wouldn't have had this participate, and we would have avoided this. But truth checking it on the ground is a good first observation for this. But that said, it probably guides us to some areas that are highly suitable and may have some underutilized light industrial commercial strip that could be redeveloped and repurposed into some really excellent options for multifamily housing. Has sewer access, a nearby grocery store, transit access. Again, it avoids impacts on all of our key natural resources and habitat areas. And it might have proximity to jobs thanks to the successful industrial park just to the north, and to the commercial and service center right there.
I will go over the last one. I think this one's pretty straightforward. This is East Washington Street. Similar story to the other two kind of examples we just gave. It's an underutilized commercial strip that might just, potentially be due for some revitalization, some new life. So you can kind of see here, we've got a Stop and Shop, some restaurants. Again, we're right near the beautiful downtown that we've been discussing this whole time. And just as Grant was saying with some of the previous examples, it's got sewer access, it's got those nearby amenities we just went over, it's close to downtown, it's got a bus route that runs through here, it's sidewalked, and it's away again from those key habitats and important natural resources. So it's our final example, but it's just another one that's very straightforward and kind of, I think, the most simple example of how this analysis can point you towards a great area for your multifamily district. So
that sort of concludes what we've prepared for today. And I say for today because we, in the coming weeks, will create both a very simple user guide and a very simple sample data set and make it available for download for those of you who would like to try something like this on your own time and with your own mapping techniques. And we are certainly happy to answer any questions and kind of help guide you through that process if it's something you'd like to do. I would like to return to Rob's points and Rob's presentation. I think that can be equally impactful and useful with a lot less GIS and just a lot more getting your hands smudged with colored pencils and so forth. So that's another really viable alternative for this type of analysis. So I think we're ready, Claire and Emma, to kind of get into the Q&A. I answered one during the chat, but why don't we go ahead and talk about that one as well? The question was more or less about how do you consider mapped resources that are in neighboring communities? So the quick answer is everything that came from Mass GIS, habitat areas, wetlands, and so forth, all of that good, rich data that's available Commonwealth-wide, that does already participate in this analysis. It's when you get to that local sort of land use-based, parcel-based analysis where we identified all of the shopping areas and all of the grocery stores and banks. That's where you can probably get where this analysis just looked at North Attleboro, but if you wanted to, you could certainly include the communities around you with the same techniques, querying by use code, looking for those first hits for grocery stores and restaurants and so forth. And then what we did, Amber and I kind of truth checked all that by just simply looking for those everyday places in Google and kind of cross-referencing that research with the parcel data. A good example I can provide is that one really well-loved and well-used local grocery store, because it's a mixed-use development, it's primary residential, secondary commercial. That didn't really ping in our first pass through the GIS, but we were able to add it simply by adding a field, grocery stores, food, retail, whatever you want to call it, and field calculating yes for that, and then having those participate in the analysis. I think there was another question, a follow-up question about other data, other considerations, traffic, high crash locations. Absolutely, this is not an exhaustive list. We certainly could have said, I'm really worried about impacts to my roadways. That could have and maybe should have been one of our 8th group score. And you can certainly use high crash locations, high VC ratios, volume to capacity ratios, poor pavement conditions, and say, hey, we're really worried about impacts, similar to the worry we have about impacts to natural features represented here. I hope that answered your question.
May I add to that, Grant?
Absolutely.
So addressing the question about considering neighboring town features, we actually did do that here. For the presentation's sake, we've clipped our fishnet to the town border, but prior to this, it actually did extend into Plainville and its surrounding communities and made a fairly large square. And so needless to say, you can absolutely do that. You can specify any extent that you want if you're doing this in GIS or if you're doing it in trace paper and you have maps of neighboring communities, and consider, just as we did, neighboring communities, assets and resources for sure.
Great. Catherine asks that we seem to have added a criterion for underutilized areas. What if there aren't any? Good question. I don't believe we've actually have any map feature in this weighted analysis that represents underutilized areas. Rather, we've sort of guided ourselves to them when we think about implementation and translating all this GIS into, hey, we're thinking about zoning changes. So just a quick point of clarification, we actually don't have like underutilized areas participating in this analysis, but you certainly could add them. I know that's really not your goal. You say that there aren't any, but you could add them in terms of just qualitative analysis from your town planning office through simple kind of back of the envelope things such as improvement value to land value ratios, other measures of distress for properties. So that could be a consideration you added. If there aren't any, I think it's just this is the kind of thought exercise that you would have to participate in. You'd have to say, well, how can I guide my decision making otherwise? Or am I really trying to maximize quality of life? Am I really trying to maximize assets or access to key infrastructure? Am I really looking to minimize impacts? You really have to kind of like think about your priorities and follow them to the end of their logic to the greatest extent that you can. I hope that answered your question. I'm happy to try again by email or phone. Our contact information is available. Good question. So Katie asks, if the housing under the statute has to be suitable for children, what's the impact on existing schools and transporting those children to school? This analysis does not consider that. We're really thinking about physical planning in space, although I'm hearing very clearly that a transportation group score, just thinking about existing roadway capacities, trip generators, and schools would be a good analysis to add. So that's, your point's well taken, but this does not consider that analysis or that perspective. I see Allison second that question, so I apologize to Katie and Allison. Levels, right, okay. Yeah, we did not. Valerie Massard, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your last name, asked another transportation related question. So I'm kind of like forehead slapping, like, yeah, we probably should have done a transportation network analysis. Although, you know, this is where this isn't in my kind of backyard in terms of area of expertise. I don't know how much of that data is readily available. I think some of it has to kind of depends on the RPA or the MPO where you're located. But yeah, I mean, we already went through the list of high crash locations, congestion measures, major trip generators. That sort of analysis could have easily been kind of a push, I would think, for some of these. Although much like the market-based response to, we think that infrastructure solutions will happen either through private development opportunities or affirmative local or state grants. I think some of those transportation issues should not be a deal breaker in this type of siting analysis.
I just wanted to take a second to draw attention to two things in the chat as well. Shelley has kind of offered some insight as to school concerns and the zoning kind of effects that will affect that. So I think that's worth addressing. And then I think as well, regarding the comment about underutilized, so I was just thinking about this because Katie Lacey has also offered some information about wastewater infrastructure. And as Grant said, we did not include underutilized in our analysis. I think for the case of North Attleboro, we're thinking about opportunity, but it is just worth noting again that there doesn't necessarily have to be a built result out of the zoning district that is put in place. Again, it's just to say that there is capacity there for that multifamily housing. And for North Attleboro, again, we're looking at that kind of opportunity, but it's not necessary, at least in terms of my understanding of it at this point.
Excellent. Any other questions? We still have plenty of time, and I did want to just say again that I know that SERPED staff would be happy to answer any questions about this analysis, and once the user guide and the data set is available, we can kind of get anyone started who's interested in conducting this analysis. But we want to just sort of run through it today and hit those main ideas. Again, not meant to be in the place of local knowledge or existing planning, rather give you a set of tools that you can use to kind of truth check and explore and scenario plan. Yeah, that was our goal.
I've also seen a couple questions for the link. I just made that available in the chat. If anyone has trouble accessing it, just let me know and we'll try and troubleshoot.
And we'll be sure to get the data link and the user guide link to MHP so that they can post it along with that story map link. And again, it will certainly be available within the coming weeks, by the end of the year at the latest. Any other questions that we can answer? Well, I hope this has been useful. And again, I want to thank MHP and DHCD and all of our municipal partners who have done, who've really come together to add to this conversation and add a lot of value. And we're optimistic that all of these tools and resources will add or will lead to really good outcomes once Section 3A zones start coming online and producing the affordable housing and the market rate housing and the good community development outcomes that the Commonwealth is trying to produce. All right, I'll turn it back over to Claire and Emma.
Yes, thank you so much, Grant. Definitely appreciate your expertise. I would like to thank all of our presenters today, Taylor, Grant, Robert, Amber. Thank you so much for your time. I think I saw a lot in the chat that these are really cool tools, and I totally agree. So thanks for taking the time to show them to us. Thank you to our audience, as always, for your thoughtful questions and your comments. With that said, please join us next week, same place, same time, for session 8 of this series, Making the Case for Affordable Housing, Local Engagement and Narrative Change. And that'll be presented by the folks at CHAPA, which is the Citizens Housing and Planning Association. Also, if you can check the chat, there are some really useful links in there. Take some time to peruse them if you have the opportunity and desire. If not, we'll give you back your time and thank you again.